Welcome back to the Brother to Brother Show. I'm your host, K Mo. Thanks so much for being with us tonight. We're going to have a special guest. We're going to talk a little bit about relationships as we always do, but we have a little twist to it. We're going to talk about the historical side and how relationships are affected these days with our guest today. I'm going to let him introduce himself, and so I'm bringing him in. Mike, how you doing, man?
I'm good, Kmo. What's going on, brother? How you doing, man?
I'm doing fantastic, man. Can't complain at all. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, no, man. Appreciate you having me on, your show today.
Mhm.
Definitely willing, ready to get into
Yeah.
this conversation and, brother to brother.
Yeah, so when we were talking a couple of weeks ago, we were trying to figure out how we could do this collaboration and what was some good topics that we can discuss and what was your expertise. And so we talked about how you did a lot of things in the community as well as you have a history background. So I'll let you introduce yourself and your company and let's go into it.
Absolutely. Well, my name is Michael Anthony. I'm the founder and creative director of Pure Flow Productions. We do multimedia project management. So we develop campaigns through website, video production. I'm a filmmaker by trade, but then look at the whole creative assets of small businesses. So if you're looking for a creative director to help sort of your business get out there more, then that's what Pure Flow Productions does for you. Also, I work with the organization called Soulful Socials, where we do culturally curated events in Northern Virginia and the DMV area, where we've done relationship panels, speed dating, cigar mixers, and all kinds of things. So, do a lot of those things. And then also, but I'm a documentarian by trade. And the majority of my work has been on African and African-American culture.
Right. So with that said, let's go into it. So I know we met not too long ago at one of your events,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought it was fantastic. So we started this relationship. We said, let's go for it. Two guys just trying to do the right thing, but also try how to bring our relationships back together because it seems like they're drifting apart. And I think we're both old enough to kind of understand and remember when relationships were pretty solid. They weren't perfect, but let's talk a little bit about what's happened within that. And so I'm going to ask the first question, and
Okay,
so
go ahead, brother.
we
Let's
can
go ahead
go
and get
right
ready.
into it.
Yes, sir.
So
Yes, sir.
with your background, and your perspective on like generational trauma, so like slavery, segregation, and the war on drugs. How do you feel like that's hurt the Black men and women in how we relate to each other and how we come together as one in relationships?
Well, I think it starts with slavery, obviously, the
Mhm.
acculturation of our community. We came from different tribes
Mhm.
from all over Western Africa. Also, some of us were here already, too.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think that the acculturation of where our societies were at in our communities as tribes, being acculturated into this white supremacy attitude,
Mhm.
um, and us being property, right? We couldn't, and during that time, uh, slaves could not get married. Slaves
Right.
couldn't read, slaves couldn't
Mhm.
write, anything like
Mhm.
that. And one piece of history that I learned about like 2 years ago
Mhm.
was how the transatlantic slave trade was stopped
Mhm.
after the Revolutionary War.
Mhm.
So in
Mhm.
the early 1800s, the transatlantic slave trade stopped. But then what they started doing is started having breeding houses. So then it
Mm.
was just breeding, Black slaves, over and over and over again throughout
Mhm.
the 1800s. And the population actually exponentially grew
Mhm.
because of that. So even from the beginning, even having this family structure was already dismantled from the
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
then we get to 1865, the ratification of the 13th Amendment, but
Mhm.
then we're dealing with Reconstruction,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
And we're promised 40 acres and a mule, but
Mhm.
obviously that was taken away from us. But
Mhm.
then we had these small communities, right? We
Mhm.
had different plots of land,
Mhm.
different
Mhm.
areas, even in cities, when we did the Negro migration and moved up north, we had these places, the Black Wall Street. Everybody knows
Mhm.
Black Wall
Mhm.
Street,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
there was many Black Wall Streets, around the country that people don't know
Mhm.
about. Durham, North Carolina, in New Orleans, in New York. But guess what? Those were either taken by force or by some sort of political judicial function. I mean, even living in the DMV here, where the Pentagon sits at right now
Mhm.
was a community called Queen City.
Mm-hmm.
and it was completely black, but they were displaced.
Mm-hmm.
So then whenever you start displacing people from place to place, then how is it that you can really build a community?
Right.
And then you had the white flight. Whenever black people, we started having enough money, they
Mm-hmm.
took away our own generational wealth of what
Mm-hmm.
Black Wall Street could have gave us. Then we started going to school and moving into these white neighborhoods, and then they started redlining us, and dropping down the property value, making sure that the education wasn't good enough. Then you segue to the civil rights. Again, families were looking strong. It was about community. But then a lot of people would say that desegregation actually was a deterrent to our black families' structure and even our community, because now we're going out there trying to search for whiteness. There's this always this sort of what whiteness is.
So with that said, I can speak a little bit to that because my grandmother was one of the first of her generation to go to college. At that time, people weren't really going to college, but that was like the first real group of kids who were going to college. And from that, I feel like a lot of the families had to stay together. I feel like the segregation, it forced us to stay together in a positive way. And we, again, I don't like to use that word, nobody perfect, but no, I don't think there's any perfect families, but we stuck together as a community, and we had to stick together as a community. And one of the things that I'm seeing, I'm gonna kind of going off topic with this, even when I've been with like Africans or like Ethiopians or other tribes of Africa, and when they see each other, there's a level of connection that they have. Even in America. And there's some level of connection that they still have, and they're smiling amongst each other. They're communicating, they're talking amongst themselves to kind of have that togetherness. And it seems like we've lost that, to a certain extent. Being from the South, and I think you're from the South as well. Walking down the street and speaking to a lady or even guy, and it's giving them a greeting and saying hello, just walking past them. There was always that. And it seems like we're kind of even getting away from those type of things. But I feel like once when we were segregated and we were forced to be together, not forced to be together, but we were forced to get together in a certain aspect, we have more community.
Yeah. And I go ahead.
Related to, to what the world is now, which is white America, we lost some of that.
Right. And of course, white people are one of the lowest populations, right, in the world. When you think about black people and Asians and different things like that. But of course, their supremacy as far as having gunpowder and the way that they used it definitely gave them an upper hand. But we're not talking about that topic right? on this show here.
Right.
But then I think, depending on what spaces you're in, because if you go, and we've both been in spaces where there have been a whole lot of white folks.
Yep.
You see one or two black folks,
you can connect. Yep, that's true.
So we still have that commonality, that connection whenever we see people. So, even being comfortable as a black face in a white place, we will find each other and then find that camaraderie. Right. So where, Africans, if they come here, they still feel out of place, trying to understand even what blackness is. So then, so that's why they have that connection. But then I think, after desegregation, but then we had the Black Revolution, revolutionaries, Carmichaels and
70s,
exactly. Yep. But then they had this thing called COINTELPRO. Now that's where it all started, right? With COINTELPRO going in and infiltrating. I think it was pretty well depicted in Judah and the Black Messiah, Judas and the Black Messiah. When they would infiltrate, get our own people who would infiltrate our communities and then promote drugs and violence and different things like that, in order to make us look like criminals and look like monsters, which then goes all the way back to whenever the first films were coming out. We're talking about Birth of a Nation, 1914, I believe. And then that's what started the whole crack epidemic, right? And the prison pipeline system, and and of course, what Snowfall even did, that show was based off of how they used crack. The CIA used crack in order to fund a war. So, and this is not we need to blame the white man kind of thing, but we do need to understand that this was all strategic, in order to make sure, because of the influence that we have as a people. I mean, we drive trends, we drive dollars, as we can see right now that's going on with Target, and them losing money because of how they're restricting DEI and different things like that. So and also the narrative, now, and this is a question that I had whenever I was working on my thesis film when I was in graduate school, of what's the African in my American, right? Because of the acculturated nature of us as Black people, that we don't know exactly from where within Africa we come from. Or is media actually framing how we act and how other people respond perceive us, right? If we don't have a flag, so if you ask anybody out on the street that is not Black, you go up to a white person, ask them, what's your race? I'm white. Well, what's your ethnicity? Oh, I'm German, I'm Italian, I'm Irish. You go to somebody who's Asian race, ask what their ethnicity is. I'm Korean, I'm Japanese. Everybody has because America's a melting pot. Us as Black people, our race and our ethnicity is one and the same. And so, thinking about how, that framing is, whenever we see anything that's on screen, on social media, even back in the movies during Blaxploitation, that's why Blaxploitation was super popular, even though it didn't have necessarily the most positive, representation of Black folks on television, but you still saw Black people in a hero type of role, and so we started picking from these things of, this is how we should act, this is how we should dress, just like hip hop music. Hip hop music started birthed out of consciousness and sort of reporting on what was happening in the streets. I mean, NWA's first album, Compton, was reporting on, the brutalities that were happening in the streets, but then that shifted into gangster rap, and then our entire mind frame shifted with that. So I think media literacy is something that we don't really consider when it comes to the impact on us and our relationships.
Right. So what do you feel like? So I think the biggest thing is, even to what you said, it's probably right after the 80s, because the 70s we still had it with the Black Panther Party, and even with my mother, us generation, they were civil rights kids, but they grew up they were in their 20s during that Black Panther Party. In the 80s, it started just kind of messing up, and so that's where we came about. And then the 90s and the 2000s, I felt like we've kind of fallen off. And even in the 90s, we had a little bit of, I think we still had a comeback, because we still had civil rights folks around. They were older, but they were still around. And even the Robert Townsends of that era, they, birthed a lot of what they wanted Black people to be like. That coming in the 80s, again, that's where the Cosby Show and Different World and things like that, we still had some of that, but I feel like it started late 90s, early 2000s is kind of where we start losing it, and that's where we kind of are now with that new generation.
I can kind of see that too. I mean, for some reason, I always look at the 90s. Of course, we're same vintage, right? So the 90s felt like it was the best era, because that's when you had all the Black movies, all the Black TV
all
shows,
of them.
Music. We had R&B. We still had ballad singers, brother. Back in the day. But then I would even take it, to World War II and the Vietnam War, right? So then you had Black soldiers going to World War II, coming back thinking they're going to get their GI Bill, and never received it. But then you had Black men going over to Vietnam, getting murdered, and then coming back, still not getting support and being on drugs, right? And that was in the
70s and 80s, guys. And I think I always say this to people, and they don't. Again, we're from the same time. I remember being a kid, and a lot of those guys on the corner that were called winos, those they usually had Vietnam hats on, or jackets, or whatever the case may be, and they were just lost. And we, I think we didn't understand, but definitely understand what it's turned out to be now.
Exactly. And then that's whenever the narrative, right, of Black fatherhood, not being a good Black father. There's no, good Black men out there. And then, like myself, I didn't know who my father was until I was 30 years old. Me and him have a relationship now, but he did fall into sort of that stereotype of what a lot of Black men our age kind of grew up around, right? And then there's this gap of this passing of the torch, right? Of like these Black men and Black women of the 60s, and then through the 70s, through disco and through Vietnam War, and then through the dismantling of Black revolutionary ideas, or radical, well, in things, though, they are not even radical, right? We consider them radical because that's what white people tell us they are. But really, they were just liberation ideas.
Right.
How can we be on par with everybody else? Once those things got dismantled, then it was like, what are we fighting for? Because from what I remember, we wasn't protesting at a young age, and I remember Rodney King in 92, and that was happening in LA, and I was shocked.
Right.
Oh my goodness, what is going on? Oh, okay, this black man. And then we had the OJ thing, which was a whole nother situation. But it felt, I guess, a false sense of security during our time.
I think for me, I was in high school, middle school when we did the Million Man March.
Yes.
And the Million Man March was such a huge deal because they didn't think they could bring this many Black men to Washington, D.C. and have a peaceful protest. And from what I remember and doing my brief research on it, it was to help those Black men to go back into their communities and help the next generation, which were us. And so I think that we got some sense of that in our community, but the next torch, we were also the ones that say, hey, let's go to, get your education, leave the community. And so what I remember, even listening to like my elders, our neighborhood was never called the hood. And when you hear hood, it always sounds bad. And I remember even my grandmother, she lived in a neighborhood with all Blacks. And just because they were all Blacks, you live by your teachers that you went to school with, you live by doctors, everybody stayed in that neighborhood. But our generation heard you move out of that community to go get it, to make it. And so it's interesting how, things are now, because our kids are definitely growing up in a very soft and safe space, but they don't know how difficult they're going to have it, because it's hard for them to kind of live in this world, because we've been taught since I think 2007-8, when the Obama era kind of was, and we thought it was safe and we thought we was all good, but we know that's not the case at all. We still got a lot of work to do, and we have to continue to have these type of conversations. I want to go into that next question.
Yes, sir.
So today, over 50% of Black adults have never been married, and about 1 in 3 Black men are expected expected to remain unmarried throughout their lives. What do these numbers reveal to you in our community?
It reveals that because of the lack of opportunity for us to even sustain these communities and sustain these families, that it feels like that's on par. And then the representation of it, right? Now, if you haven't read the Willie Lynch letters, please do so. Now, those things have since been debunked as far as not being factual, right? But there was one sort of section in there that I remember as far as how to break up the Black family. And it was about, separating, the men and women, take the biggest, Blackest buck that you have, make an example of him in front of everybody else, right? In front of everybody, right? Tear him apart, tar and feather him, whip him, do whatever you need to do, right? Then send the women and the children to one side, right? And then what the women are going to do is then teach their daughters on how to survive without a man, but then coddle the sons. Right. And so when I segue to that,
they won't be that image that they just saw.
Correct. Because they want to coddle their sons. So that means their sons will be safe and not be brutalized and tortured. And then you kind of fast forward, other communities, when they go to college or they go out there, they're trying to get them MRSs, right? Like I know in other communities that are not African-American, and some of y'all may even know of them, where if they're not married by the age of 28 or 30, that is a problem, right? That is a problem. They should be having kids. They should be doing this. They should be doing that, already set up. Black women don't go to college to find a husband. They go to college to establish themselves, get their education,
be independent.
And be independent. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that, right? But the thing is, though, the dynamics, sort of change, right? And then I also think that, again, what examples do we have of good Black family structures? You know what I'm saying? Especially if we've had some gaps in our own family heritage of divorces or fathers not being there, and so on and so forth, as far as the Black love dynamic, right? Like you said, we had the Cosby Show, right? We had Dwayne and Whitley. You know what I'm saying? We had Martin and Gina, and then, and I actually had this conversation because I don't know if you've ever seen the show This Is Us. It was on NBC. It was a really good show. But the Sterling K. Brown was on the show, and he had a wife, and it was probably one of the best depictions of a relationship, period, on television that I've ever seen. But it was a white show, and he was a Black adopted child in this white family. Him and his wife dynamic was amazing. And I would ask people, like, name me any other Black couple on television that represents that. And a lot of people can't recall, because even if you had Andre and Rainbow, from Blackish, and you had some other things like that. But typically,
but since then, nothing really.
Nothing.
And most of it is like now it's a lot of mixed couples, even on the commercials or whatnot. You don't see too much of that at all. And so you see what they're trying to do. And I think that's something that we have to stand up for. And I say stand up for because that's what our parents did. They stood up for us. They said something. They stood in front of different monuments and got sprayed. My mother got sprayed with a water hose when she was a teenager. So none of us has ever experienced anything like that. So for us to not stand here and actually say this is what it is, so we can kind of fight for our relationships, we almost have to like force feed it so they can understand, like, we're still here. And we still believe that this can happen.
Right. And it's the narratives that we have to sort of take, right? Because, how many record companies do we own? How many TV networks do we own? Even when you have Black shows that's out there, they quickly taken off the air, and again, we don't need to take our cues from media. But the thing is, though, media frames a lot of what we have. You are what you eat, right? And if you're eating a whole bunch of raunchy music, now don't get me wrong. Well, not the new trap music, good Lord, no. But but there's some songs out there that it's fun, right? But if you listen to the lyrics of some of the rappers, male and female, repetitively, and you're in the club and you have a PhD and you up in there dropping it like it's hot,
you'll start believing that stuff too.
You will start believing that stuff. And then you start watching reality TV. And then you start seeing how the wives of Atlanta and the wives of Beverly Hills are completely different in even how they deal with conflict. Right. And then we start thinking that that's how we're supposed to be.
How we resolve issues. And I think that's the one thing that even when I've done like coaching, or even when I've gone to therapy, even talking to one of my friends and pastors, who's a good friend of mine, has said to me, the problem that we have, that we don't know how to resolve issues. We don't know how to do it. And just because you are saying it, I'm speaking from a man's point of view now, you're saying it in a certain tone, or you're trying to make sure that you are the difference between serious and not being serious. There is some backing, or there's something that has to go from your tone and the seriousness of our conversation, so that we can know that we're serious about this thing. Because if everything's so light and YOLO, then nobody will ever take this stuff serious. And I think we've gotten to the point now where the guys in their 60s and 70s are tired. They can't do it anymore. And so they need us to continue the torch and keep saying stuff, so that the young kids, because it's not like this is new. We heard it too when Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre came out, and our parents said you don't need to listen to this type of music all the time, or on Sundays. If you're coming from a religious background, you got to turn that stuff off. At least this is the Lord's day. you gotta have some balance in your life when it comes to that type of stuff. Because if not, it will take over, just like any other um, advertisement or any other type of thing on TV that's trying to get you to buy something. And that's all social media is now. They want you to buy something over and over again. The music, and they're taking over our kids.
Yeah.
Now, and that's all they're doing. That's all they're doing all day. We can balance that because we also live in a time where we have phones and social media, but that's their life. So how do we balance that with them and tell them like, hey, it's time to take some time with just the family. And a lot of even in my dating experiences, I find that even educated PhD and so women, it's hard for them. And I'm thinking that everybody was taught a certain way, but everybody wasn't.
No, there wasn't. No, I mean, I have a 17-year-old right now that I'm dealing with. That 17-year-old black man right now. I'm about to graduate from high school, and
congratulations. That's still an accomplishment.
Yeah, it is. It is. And he got into college, about to go to Virginia State University. Nice. Another HBCU. So definitely keeping that tradition going. Because I told him, boy, you going to college. Obviously, I want you to go to A&T, Aggie Pride. But if you can't, if you don't want to, just go to HBCU. You know what I'm saying? Because that grounding definitely frames who you are whenever you walk into a room. But then I digress. But then, yeah, I think with media, it does convince us on what's awesome, what's great. I mean, I read an article the other day of the difference between a $250 pair of jeans and a $15 pair of jeans is really 3%. Of like the fabric and then how it's made. Right. So there's really, but we're convinced that this thing is the best, right? That we can have. I mean, we have, Teslas, that's hot right now. Everybody was buying up Teslas, but then guess what? They was having issues when it got cold. They wasn't the bee's knees, but everybody thought that it was the best thing because we got convinced of it. And I think that by us,
that's all we follow those trends so much.
Follow trends and with us, because we want to detach ourselves so much from the hardship, right?
Being poor and not having and this and the third. Yeah.
Well, I mean, even if you do the math, like, so 1619, right? Now, obviously, we're just going to use that because that's what they say. 1619 is whenever the first slaves came to Virginia, as far as receipts. Now, we know that they was here beforehand, but we're just going to use that as a fact. 1619 to 1865, that's 267 years of uninterrupted acculturation slavery.
Yeah,
straight shot, no chaser. 1865 to really 1968.
Yeah, another 100 years.
Another 103 years of Reconstruction, KKK, lynching parties, sundown towns, redlining.
Depending on where you live, too, at the 60s, it may have gone to the 70s.
Right.
It's like slavery. It could have been another 10 years in a deep South.
So really, we're in, if you think about the totality, we're still kind of in the infancy, but a lot of black people sometimes don't want to get as far away from the servitude attitude that we had when we were slaves, to where it's like, okay, no, I have to show my worth, and I'm pretty sure you've seen a lot of people in different communities, millionaires walking around with busted shoes, but 1995 Honda Civic, right? But then got a mansion. But then yet we got Escalades on rims, maybe behind on some rent, because we're trying to appear like we have something, even if we don't, because it makes us feel good, right? And that's whenever the
temporary feel good,
right? And I think that's where the trauma comes into play, of that temporary feel good, because then it's hard to have something sustainable with the relationship, because people are going to get on your nerves, right? Then if you have this I can do bad by myself sort of attitude, both men and women, then how is it that then you can sustain that? And we learn that through media and music.
Okay. So we're going to switch it to women now. I'm glad you said that. So, Black women are the most educated group of women, a group of people in the United States, yet also represent the largest group of unmarried women. How do you think that is pressure on them, or the career ambition and historical expectations has played a part on them getting the outcomes that a lot of them would like to have?
I think it's so, that's kind of a few thoughts, right? Well, one thing is, do we need to ask the question, is the Black family matriarchal led as opposed to patriarchal led at this point in time,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because most communities are patriarchal led, right? The man is the head of the household.
Mm-hmm.
But then,
Mm-hmm.
you know, me and you, we could talk about our grandmothers. You know, I didn't know my grandfather because he passed before
Mm-hmm.
I was born, you know,
Right. Mm-hmm.
and I heard that he was a good man,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I had some uncles, but, you know, they was running the streets, you know, but then my aunts and my moms, you know, so, you know, is that worth the conversation? You know, that, you know, is there a shift? And maybe there's not, you know, because I think men, we still want to lead and things like that. So I think that with Black women being high achievers, you know, is a great thing. But then the thing is, though, if there's so many of them, but then there's not enough men that are higher achievers too, then are you going to stay single? You know, and this is not even talking about you lowering your standards, because just because somebody may not make as much money as you, now you're talking about this person's character. Matter of fact, me and you were part of a conversation not too long ago where a woman said that, yeah, she would date a man who's young, who doesn't make as much, but as soon as she takes him to a certain space, then she has to train him up in order to teach him how to act. See, now we're talking about character, right? And so are you equating somebody's economics to their integrity? Because if you are, then you're kind of looking, you know, you're hustling backwards.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think, you know, Black women, they want to be able to be self-sustained, right? But then still be in their soft season, you know, and still be led. So then, and the question is, you know, like, where's the give or take there? And there are a lot of good quality Black men out there, right? That are looking for good women. But the thing is, though, is he the archetype of the list that you are looking for?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it is not. You know, if he doesn't have a certain type of car, if he doesn't have a certain type of income, if he doesn't wear the certain type of shoes, he can still make good money. But does he fit that mold to where she can have all of the Instagram moments?
I do that side because I've been having this conversation, this same topic, for the last 3 days with several people. Some of them were a part of that conversation, and it's a very touchy situation because we understand what they're talking about. I always say that if you want to have a certain type of guy, you also have to know what that type of guy wants, and that is difficult. And to your point, those I'm going to use white guys, not just white guys, because it's not just white guys, but those guys who make a lot of money, who don't floss, who don't have the name brand shoes. I have at least 5 I can think off the top of my head. One in particular, older gentleman, mid 50s, paid for his kid to go to North Carolina, University of North Carolina, UNC Chapel Hill, paid. No scholarship, paid for it. To the point of she had 2 scholarships to go to run track. He said because UNC was his alma mater and she decided to change, he still paid. And we know how much, I'm sure you know how much college is. And so with that said, he doesn't floss, he travels. He does a little traveling here and there because he's, you know, at that age and he's back in the field and doing a much better job of finding the type of woman that he needs. And I say need because he had some hardships with his relationships and he was married, divorced, got back out there and find a beautiful woman. And they're doing well together, but it took some time to kind of like, and also for him to know who he was, to go back in there and say, you know what, I built that confidence. But that particular guy, I'm going to be honest, I think he's the David Allen Greer on Boomerang. And I know, you know, that type of guy where, you know, he's always looked past. And I think that's who a lot of them are saying that they don't want because they want the Eddie Murphy. They want the Marcus Garvey. Not Marcus, what's his last name? Whatever.
Yeah, I know you're talking about. Yeah, Marcus.
Marcus. They want Marcus,
right.
But the David Allen Greer character is what I envision that are saying that they have to help out. And if they wait a little bit longer, if they help them out with those other things that they can actually change, because those Marcuses, as we know, those are the ones who are playing you. Those are the ones that ain't really serious. Those are the ones that are going to give you a heartbreak. And then what do you say at the end? There are no good men out here.
Love should have brought you home last night, because that's a great thing, because you're right. Holly Berry chose Marcus, but she was with David Allen Greer first. Then, good guy, good guy. Obviously his
parents on her, what would have been there, everything
would have chose her over everything else. But then she chose the flashy guy, got her heart broken, had to leave her job. Now she did end up getting, being successful, right? But she did bad all by herself, right? And then, but Marcus, he hit the ground and then had to come in there hand in hand with the kids in order to get the
Marcus Graham.
Marcus Graham, yes,
that's one
Marcus
of my favorite
Graham.
movies. That's where he's.
Oh, dude, that's between that and Harlem Nights, dude. That's my two favorite Eddie Murphy joints. Yeah.
But to that point, though, Mike, what I'm saying is a lot of Marcus Grahams don't revert back to what Marcus Graham did at the end. That's the problem. That's very, very rare. You understand what I'm saying? But a lot of David Allen Greer's out here, and a lot of women don't want that guy, and that's security.
And then you get mad when you see him walking around with something that's a little bit lighter, a little straighter hair.
Yeah.
Now he got himself together. He ain't looking all corny. You know what I'm saying? Maybe shouldn't dress him up. Maybe he working out, and you like, man, why he?
Yeah. So we're trying to get back into that, and I feel like with that conversation, and I had some ladies on that did our survey, but also came back and talked to me about it and said, like, we understand what you all were trying to describe. And we also know that it's not settling. It's really understanding that this is the type of guy I want, and I have to be okay with it. And if I want to be that boss chick too, like Robin Givens was on that movie, right? If I want to be that boss chick, I have to be okay with the guy that's maybe the guy at home with the kids, or who's not as dominant. Because I've heard it so many different times, Mike. Like we're trying to. My cousin said it the other day, and I'm just going to say it out loud. As much as we want to say that, we're using Jay-Z and Beyonce as his power couple, Beyonce stays home with the kids and loves to be a mom. There is no doubt about that. Even to the point where when she goes on her tours, she's bringing the kids with her. So it's not like she doesn't love this space that she's from Houston, Texas. Like she's from the South. So, but she's been all of her 20s and 30s was saying, girl, do this. And she's doing the opposite. So we have to really understand what it is. It's trend. All this stuff we're talking about is about trends. All this stuff we're talking about is about where we came from. And we have to understand that nobody else cares about us except for us.
Right.
To me, that's the biggest thing, and I think that's what our ancestors did too. They all knew that nobody is going to take care of us except for us. Even to this day, nobody. As we're having this conversation, as much as we can look at the media, as much as we don't have control over, we have control over. But I'm talking about the regular, everyday guy. We have control over what we do, and we have to make sure we message that into our community, because if not, some of those people, and they're going to be inflated, and they're going to be, when they get to be at a certain age, it's going to be a wrap. Not a wrap where they can't find anybody, but it's going to be a wrap if you don't understand this is just what it is.
Right.
See what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, no, I get it. And also to men also, no, I get it. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to speak over you, but also men too. Because, I've been out here in the dating scene, and some of the stories that women tell me about how guys do take advantage, so a woman will probably provide and do something and want to invest in a man because she's like, okay, he has potential. There's a lot of women out here who was like, you know what? I don't care if you have anything now, but I see that you have potential. You know what I'm saying? And I want the best for you, things like that. And then a dude will run her credit and just run her to the ground. And then she becomes jaded, and then she sort of maybe thinks that maybe a whole lot of other guys that are maybe in the similar situation may do that. So there's a lot of women out here who have been done wrong by men. And sometimes even whenever we're in spaces with other men, and then men start talking all crazy about like they do this, they do that. Sometimes we don't even call that dude out that you wrong for what you're doing. You know what I'm saying? Like you should not be treating another black woman like this. Now, if you want to go ahead and do that, that's fine. I'm not going to judge you, but I do want to at least call out your hypocrisy brother, if you are going to say like, they ain't no good girls out here, black women is this, black women is that, but yet you out here treating women, you know, like dirt, and then you like, yeah, I'm about to pick up this chick, I got this chick, you know, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Okay, well, you know, that's all fine and well, but then you can't also complain about, you know, these women either. You know what I'm saying? Because if you an F boy, and if you treat, and if a woman reciprocates that treatment back to you, just like in Boomerang, right, then you can't get upset. And then whenever you do fall for somebody and then she breaks your heart, dude, karma works that way. So there are a lot of black men out here that have to be responsible. So yeah, there are some good brothers out there, you know, that don't get the chance, like the David Allen Greers. But then there's a lot of black women who have been done like dirty because some black men feel that, you know, they can act and respond. And I'm not even going to be somebody who said I never did that. You know, me and you are in our same vintage. In my 20s, I probably was not marriage material, you know, in my 20s. And I definitely had to make amends with some of the things that I've done. But, you know, so I think it's an even part to where all of us need to look in the mirror and be like, you know, what kind of legacy are we really leading? Because right now, if we're allowing white supremacy to continue to influence our family structure and our family narratives, you know, through social media, through stories, especially by them dismantling our history and taking different things away that we can't even learn from, right? Then, you know, then how are we going to move forward? So it's both men and women's responsibility to sort of take a reflection and be honest with yourself on what it is that you want to do as our community. So that means we can get back to, you know, it's the village that raises the children.
Right. But I also feel like it does start with us first as men. And I only say that so I don't have a pushback. I don't have a disagreement with what I'm pushing back. I'm pushing back a little bit about what you're saying, but I don't disagree with you.
Okay.
I do believe that there are guys who ain't shit. You know, like, let's be real. But I also know that in my 20s, but I would say not all men. I would always say that I'm not, if I'm moving to a space with somebody, I'm not ready. It's going to take me some time, I think that it comes back to us men all the time because, and I say us, setting that tone, hopefully that women would listen to us because it does come from the community. I mean, we're willing to die for the women in our lives. You understand what I'm saying? So the women are supposed to teach our children stuff. So I'm sure you remember when you called a young lady's house when you was started to call, you know, that voice you had to hear first. Mostly it was a man, but if there was a woman, you had to talk to an adult first before you could talk to a woman. So you had to get your stuff together. And we know that with certain women, you could not call them at certain times of night. You had to come correct. And I only say that because, you know, if you go back to like the Cosby shows or the shows, even with like the newer shows, when you have to come and meet the young lady as a teenager, you have to have that conversation with her father. And so there's some level of the man being the filter for the children. And the reason why I'm saying that, because even when we're going to, I think women need to have a filter around them at all times. I don't think that they are able to make sound decisions with the type of men that are in their lives, because historically it's always been like that. If you look at even not just our culture, well, not just other people's culture, but even our culture, like you had to make sure that you filtered and went and talked to this person's father and mother and stuff like that before you can get their hand in marriage or even date them. Nowadays, a lot of women, if they didn't have the parents around, they're trying to make decisions on their own. And what do most women make decisions on? How they feel. And if you and I both know, most women that describe, if you really start sitting back and listening to them based off of the guy that they're dealing with, it's always the Marcus guys. And I'm not just talking about physically. I'm talking about they talk game. They got game. So
he ain't corny.
He's not corny. But the David Allen Greer guys, you rarely hear them. That's why I wanted to push back a little bit. They don't get the time of day.
Oh no, I agree. Yes.
And I feel like most of those women that describe like, oh, there's no good men out here, is because you won't date the David Allen Greer guy. And the David Allen Greer guy over time will provide a level, as we get older, will provide a level of security that you won't be able to find when you get to be 40, 50. If that makes any sense. I'm not saying that. So I expect Marcus to be Marcus all the time. We might have been Marcus's when we were younger, but we matured in something different. So I don't blame Marcus to be that way in his 20s, because you shouldn't be looking. Now we're going back to our conversation that we talked about earlier of character. Right. Like, and a lot of times you and I both know if you had great game, the character, you can kind of hypnotize a woman into talking to you. And she doesn't know how to ask you anything about your character. She's just going off of roses and rainbows. Whereas when you're in that space as a woman, you need a father to be like, nah.
Or uncle or brother.
Or uncle, brother, or whatever the case. Nah, he cool, but I don't see him as protecting you. And that's why that whole giving your hand in marriage is such a big deal, because the man is supposed to filter that guy before he comes into our family. And I give you my daughter. So that's the reason why. And I get it. And I only push back because a lot of those times when I hear those women say there are no good men, I remember some of the guys they talked to, and even the conversation we had the other day, she was describing David Allen Greer.
Yeah. And the thing is, though, no, and I don't think he was pushing back. I think he was actually adding to, because, I was just saying that there are the dudes that are Marcus's and worse, right? That kind of made these women where they believed, right? That they was in love and that they were pouring into a man and expecting that man to pour back into them, and it didn't work out. So now they quantify a certain type, a certain character, and be like, okay, a broke, somebody who ain't making as much as me because this one dude did not treat me right. Boom, knock him off the list. So I'm just not going to mess with him. But see, the thing is, I think
we're not talking about character.
Character, correct.
Character is always the most important thing with any man. It could be Marcus, it could be David Allen Greer. Yeah. Is what is your fundamental intentions? And a lot of times men can integrity. A lot of times men can talk to other men and kind of get a sense of what you're on and what you're doing. Because it's not just about the taking you out and stuff like that. It's like the emotional connection too. It's the safety space. It's I think you said you had daughters too, right? Like
I got one daughter. Yep, I got one daughter. Yep, one son.
Yeah, so you're looking at those type of things too when when you're in that space. So
oh yeah, no, I take my daughter out. I take her on daddy-daughter dates all the time. Open up the door for her. I go pick her up at my ex-fiance's house. I'm dressed up. She's dressed up. And I treat her just like a guy would treat her on a date. Just so that means she can understand. And I've been married. I've been engaged. Those things didn't work out. For me. Wishing another time it did. Maybe that's for another conversation another time. But then kind of going with the conversation that we're having, this comes to mind of how we sometimes date based off of other people's expectations, right? Because some people would be like, oh, well, this dude ain't corny, so I can bring him around my friends, right? In other communities, people won't do that. And there was one dude I remember, I was moonlighting as a stand-up comedian at one point in time. Okay. And I was outside this comedy club with some other comedians, whatever. This guy came over, and there was two of the girls that were there were plus size girls. And so the guy made mention of like, y'all, I love big girls. I just, y'all are soft. Y'all are sexy to me, but I can't date them. And like, well, why wouldn't you date a big girl if that's what you like? Because my friends will clown me. Oh, so that means, so you wouldn't date a big girl because your friends will clown you? And he was in his 30s. He was like, yeah, he's like, so, I may have sex with one, I may creep with one, but I would never take one out on the date. And it's like, okay, so that means, now the thing is though, so that means you're dating based off of other people's expectation. And I think women and men do this, of like what the optics are with you being this pair. But the truth of the matter is, if two people are in love, even if they unattractive, if they sitting over in the corner booth at a restaurant and they look in each other's eyes and they over there laughing and they over there having a good time and being attentive to one another, people are going to be jealous about that. They're going to be like, yo, that is so cute. That is, that is adorable. People are jealous for the love that two people have, not the optics. Because I've definitely seen two people who you would think are models,
Yes.
men and women, and they are sitting there on their phone the whole time, not engaging, not talking, but then they look good to us as far as what the media tells us, right? So I think a lot of people date based off of how their friends think, how their colleagues think, and how other people around them think of like what I should be with whenever I walk into this room.
Yeah. And so, last question for you. So, how do we? And we've kind of been talking about it. How do we educate others to get this right?
I think,
and I wanted to add to what you just said, and I'm to this question too. I think one of the biggest things that we struggle with is as people, just in general, because I think you get to a certain place in your life, you have some level of wisdom, education. And I always say education is education on that particular subject. It doesn't mean that you as a whole person. That's just a specific aspect of your research in life, but as research in that area, not necessarily who you are as a person. And then to what you just mentioned about the gentleman who may like plus size women, you have to be comfortable who you are. And just because, you're not settling just because, and I think people think they're settling because they say that because of other people, instead of being okay with what you like and being okay with who you are as an individual, and you can walk out and not care what other people think. And that's, to me, freedom.
And that's when you get most, and that's actually you trying to seek respect. That's when people respect you more. But without even having, and like you said, having that self-preservation. And guess what? The people who want to clown you for dating this person or dating that person and trying to poke holes in your relationship, even though you're happy with that person,
right?
Then that person shouldn't be in your circle
life anyway. Exactly. But that comes with wisdom. That comes with, time, life. My grandma used to always say, just keep on living and life will teach you who you are as a person. Sometimes people don't even get a chance to do that in their lifetime. That's unfortunate and that's sad. But I think the biggest thing, and we're talking about like our mental health in the space that we're going into in May. A lot of people have to be okay with where they are and accept that and not look at it as settling. So we get closer to that. I think we'll be a better people, and we might be able to see that community that we're still dreaming of.
Yeah, and I think it's just the optics, right? Of how we view ourselves, and then how we view our community, and then how we want to fit into that. And what is the idea of being Black? What I'm saying, like to you, is being Black having every pair of Jordans? Is being Black somebody who don't mind, expressing yourself in a room? Like I know you went to an HBCU. The reason why I told my son to go to HBCU, and this is nothing against people who went to PWIs, but what HBCU taught me is that when I walk in the room, you got to deal with me as a Black man. I'm not going to be unapologetic about it. I'm walking in this room. I'm not going to code switch. I'm going to be the thermostat in this room. I don't have to know how to deal with white people. You got to learn how to deal with me. And so to kind of go to where, how can we get this information out? I think you're doing it. I think, you providing this sort of platform, having brothers on here to have these real conversations. I think you're doing it. I think there's other content creators out there doing it. Because right now there's not any content out there that's really positive about our culture. If you think about the TV shows, we talked about Boomerang. When's the last Black rom-com that you've seen in the movie theaters? And even right now, where we have Abbott Elementary, and that's it, right? As far as like an all-Black cast sitcom on cable television. Netflix obviously has some of their stuff and different things like that. But then it is
Damon Wayne does have one. It is a little corny, but I still
with his son, right?
Yes, Papa's House,
right?
Yes, we're still trying to get back into it because I know he said he was trying to stay away because of the cancel culture, but he's coming back and trying to help his son out. So right,
but you think about that though. When he first got his start out, that was in living color, man, and that's whenever we was having so many content, and then also another thing too. And somebody mentioned, we talked about this too, is even during that time, you would go out to the club, or go out somewhere, and then you would start dancing, right? You would start dancing with somebody. Now,
and
people
slow dancing. And the
slow.
last song was slow dancing. You had to find the girl that you had been waiting on all night, and you would. So the slow dance was the get the number and talk to her, but it wasn't disrespectful. You had to have some level of game,
Yeah,
and the game was, hey, I really want to. This is you may have done everything else you wanted to do in the club that night, hoop,
right.
tried, and this and the third. But that one you was looking for all night, that's the one
Mhm.
you tried to grab and say, hey, this is the one I want to be with.
Right. I mean, this Drew Hill song on, girl,
Yes,
let me go ahead and take you out to go ahead and take you out
absolutely,
to the dance floor.
absolutely.
So, but no, I think the what you're doing with the work that you're doing with this platform, and the stuff that we're collaborating on in the future. I just think just reaching out, and try to get more people to really get out of their head of you are supposed to act a certain way because society is expecting you to. The black image has already been demeaned and dissected and attacked. We do not have to fall into that. We do not have to fall into that in order for you to be down, or like you said, I came from the hood or something like that. I'm pretty sure that you met people that were growing up in suburban areas, 2-parent household. As soon as they get around a certain amount of people,
Act a
then
donkey.
like acting like they came from the streets, start selling drugs, start toting guns in order to fit a persona that they think is acceptable to be accepted as a black person. And the thing is, though, we have been duped, and we have been bamboozled, hoodwinked, and that still plays on now. So I think information like this and other content creators, read some books, watch some documentaries, and get out of this framing of what you see on social media, what you see on reality TV, and some of these narrative shows, about us is exactly how we are and what we need to do. So just be more knowledgeable, and educate yourself. And I think, as more people do that, and the good thing about social media, with some content creators, they're starting to expose a lot of these things. And hopefully people are taking it and not just doing like what people do on Sunday. They go to church for an hour and a half, cry, everything like that, go get something to eat. And then the next week, they just forget everything they just learned. So hopefully the repetitiveness, and we got to almost heal from trauma and almost reacculturate ourselves in a certain type of way of really what do we want blackness to look like.
Absolutely. So Mike, go ahead and tell us a little bit as we close out about you, how we can find you, and where we should see you next.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me at Peerflow Productions. That's on Instagram, Facebook. I'm also on Instagram with Michael Anthony Vision. At Michael Anthony Vision. I'm on LinkedIn. I probably hit up LinkedIn pretty hard because try and be, in the professional realm. My website is peerflowproductions.com. And we're going to be having some things coming up with Soulful Socials. Right now, we're still building that brand up, but again, it is a culturally curated spaces to where we want to reconnect people that feel displaced, that they feel like they need to go to certain areas and certain spaces in order to have a good time and to connect with somebody and build community. So we'll definitely be in touch with you more about what Soulful Socials has going on. But yeah, I have some projects that I'm working on generational trauma and generational impact. And so, yeah, definitely can't wait to start working on that and, build with you on that and maybe come up here and tell your audience about what's going on.
Thanks so much, Mike. I appreciate it, man. I want to end with this. I wanted to say that even with how we were brought up, and I was always, they know that this is my show, brother to brother, but my company is called Tomorrow's Men. We do life coaching. We do a lot of different things, but I just want to remind us as Black people that we come from a great people. We come from we have a lot of shoes to fill, and all this stuff that we're being, is put out into the media, and these false narratives that we've had to see in the last couple of years. We come from a lot of historical places. We come from a lot of history, and the history that is in America. We have some great people, and I don't want us to forget that, because sometimes with this trauma, and then also with people talking about being nervous and anxiety all the time, like we have had to go through a lot of things, and we've always been able to get to fight through that. So until next time, I am your host, K Mo. Thanks so much for listening. Peace.